charges were dismissed. An American reporter for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested in Moscow on spying charges, escalating already tense relations between the U.S. and Russia. The White House says the State Department is in contact with the Russian government about Evan Gershkovich's detainment. Alice Barr with the latest from Washington.
The Biden administration is responding today after Russian authorities detained American journalist Evan Gershkovich on espionage charges.
These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich.
The Wall Street Journal reporter is being held in Russia after his arrest in the Ural Mountain city of Yekaterinburg. The Russian Federal Security Service accusing him of, quote, collecting information constituting a state secret about the activities of one of the enterprises of the Russian military-industrial complex. The Wall Street Journal vehemently denies the allegations, seeking the immediate release of its trusted and dedicated reporter. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner covers Moscow and knows Gershkovich well.
He's a brave guy. He was very clear-eyed about what it means to go in and out, to go back into Russia, what operating on the ground entails and what the risks are.
Gershkovich is the first American journalist arrested on spying charges in Russia since the Cold War, and it comes while U.S. relations with Moscow are at their lowest point since that time, largely due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The journalist's arrest follows Russia's detainment of WNBA star Brittany Griner on marijuana charges. She was released late last year through a prisoner exchange, while American Paul Whelan remains jailed since 2018 for espionage charges he fiercely denies. His lengthy detainment evidence that spying charges in Russia are hard to fight. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Gershkovich is set to be held until at least the end of next month. The White House says the State Department is in direct contact with the Russian government about his detention and urged any U.S. citizens in Russia to leave. Well, if you live in Owensboro and will be sticking around for spring break next week, listen up. Volunteer Owensboro is putting on Serve Our City. The event encourages families to get out and visit more than 10 local organizations. According to the director of Visit Owensboro, the goal of this is to bring more volunteers to help nonprofits.
It's a way for people to go learn about it without actually committing to it. So they can go in, they can find out all about the organization, they can tell them about their volunteer opportunities, they can learn all about it. Hopefully they find somewhere that they fall in love with and they start serving, but they're not committed. They can just kind of go try before they buy, so to speak.
If you're interested, we've got a list of the organizations participating in this on 14news.com. And if you also live in Owensboro, we have more news for you. So we have news about an event that encourages families to get out. Actually, we just told you about this story, so I'm going to go ahead and skip on to the next one. So we have, this is exciting information about a local team here in the tri-state that is getting ready to go to VEX Robotics World Championship in Dallas, Texas. Now, teams from all across the world will compete in the tournament, including students from Owensboro Innovation Academy. They are members of the Event Horizon team. A check was presented to the team today from MPD to help fund their trip for next month. Driver of the robot, Ben Austin, says he is excited to compete.
It's fun experience. We went last year, and we had some great food and stuff like that, and pretty sure we were the first in this area that went to Worlds.
The competition is set for the end of April. We'll be right back.
Okay, what's taking so long? What the frick just happened to my Roku? Did it just crash on me? I bet it did. No, it didn't.
Before, have we seen a former president indicted
Oh
in the
my
United
good
States of America?
freaking
Now, we have
God.
not actually seen this indictment. We believe it to be still under seal there in the court in Manhattan, but we now have 3 sources confirming that the grand jury has in fact voted to indict. We also have 2 sources
Jesus.
confirming that Mr. Trump's lawyers have been informed that this grand jury has voted to indict. Now, typically, the defendant gets an opportunity to surrender in a case like this. Obviously, Mr. Trump had forecasted that he would be arrested in some respect. We have no evidence that that has taken place. But the typical scenario would be for he to actually surrender at the district attorney's office. At that point, he would be processed, fingerprinted, mugshot, all of the typical processes that you would see in a regular case. Even though, of course, this is not the regular case, we do not have any timing on exactly when that processing would take place.
Now, the indictment itself, will it be sealed? Will we not perhaps see the details of it for some time?
It's typically sealed until a judge actually orders it to be unsealed. So it gets sealed. It's actually with the court right now.
And that would specify what the actual accusation
That's
is.
exactly. That's when we will actually see the piece of paper that will actually lay out all the charges. Sometimes they go into great detail. That's known as a speaking indictment, when it provides somewhat of a narrative, sort of telling the story of what happened. Sometimes it's very bare bones, and we'll have to wait and see what this one does.
We have been hearing that the legal theory, the legal basis that the DA has been looking at is one that's untested. What do we know about what the challenge was in this case?
So typically in a case like this, the falsification of business records, that's typically a misdemeanor. So we're talking just up to a year in prison. In order to elevate it, to step it up to a felony, there has to be actually a second crime, an intent to either commit or conceal a second crime. And throughout this entire investigation, we've all wondered, what would that second crime be? Could it be something related to state election law? Could it be something related to federal election law? We just don't know. And it's one of the things that we're going to be looking for when, in fact, this indictment gets
So
unsealed.
a question that essentially centers on how that money was accounted for, what it was.
Thanks. Go ahead and give me
stated to be
copyright
used for,
strike,
and
you
the
freaking
intent
idiot.
for its use.
Exactly. So it's not actually the paying of the hush money that's the crime. The problematic issue here, if in fact that's what they've indicted him on, is the way that it was accounted for on the books of the Trump organization as legal fees, when in fact
Get
it was not
off.
legal fees to Michael Cohen, his lawyer at the time. It was hush money.
Again, if the former president had predicted, a week and a half ago, that he would be arrested, obviously that has not happened right now, but we do know, again, from our sources, there has been an indictment. Let me go to senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haig. Garrett, what can you tell us?
Well, Lester, picking up that timeline from a week and a half ago, after Mr. Trump's prediction a week and a half ago Saturday that he would be arrested the following Tuesday, his legal team offered a witness of their own to this grand jury, a man named Robert Costello, who had been an attorney working with Michael Cohen around the time of this alleged hush money plot. That testimony then essentially was the last moving piece we saw in this probe for another week. On Monday of this week, the grand jury heard from what we now believe was their final witness, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. This was Mr. Pecker's second time before the grand jury. He's a key player in all of this. He was believed to be the person who brought together Mr. Cohen and attorneys for Stormy Daniels, who might have engineered or at least come up with the idea for these payments. That witness on Monday, again, believed to be the last witness this grand jury heard before their decision to indict today, apparently 2 months to the day after being convened for the very first time on January 30th. Now, as we await additional information about what the charges might be, I can tell you the political reaction is already coming in. Congress is headed out on a 2-week recess, but already we've heard from members, and it's clear that this is going to be a polarizing decision, both in the halls of Congress and politically across the nation writ large. One Republican member of Congress calling it a dark day for the country. Some Democrats cheering this on as a victory for the rule of law. Again, Lester, so much we don't know, but the political reverberations into 2024, the presidential election campaign, will be vast.
Well, of course, he has a presumption of innocence for now. Does that change anything in terms of him being a candidate for the 2024 election?
The former president's made it clear an indictment will not change his candidacy. He will plow through it. In fact, he has made the possibility of an indictment almost a plank of his campaign platform, arguing that any indictment in New York or in any of the other investigations in which we know him to be a target would be, in his words, election interference, an effort, he says, by Democratic district attorneys or prosecutors with the Justice Department to do what a political process couldn't and knock him out of this race. He has been very clear on that point. that he believes this is a political indictment, should one come, or should any additional indictments come, and he fully intends to continue his campaign in the face of any additional legal challenges.
All right, Garrett, I'll ask you to stand by. I want to go on the phone now. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos is joining
Get
us.
off
Danny,
TV,
as we
Jesus.
understand, this would be unsealed at a later date in which we would learn the details of the indictment. But would it be your best estimate that this would be a felony indictment?
I think most folks are predicting that this will be a felony indictment based on falsification of business records, which is a default misdemeanor in New York State, but it gets bumped up to a felony if the falsification of records was used in furtherance of or to conceal another crime. But I may be in the minority of folks that are thinking that that may be what's on the indictment, but also look out for the crimes related to Trump allegedly inflating his value for the purpose of securing loans or just bragging rights, and deflating his value of properties when it came time to paying taxes. That, to me, still seems like a viable set of charges that could appear on the indictment, even though reportedly there's been a lot of attention by the grand jury on the Stormy Daniels hush money payments.
This is where it gets a bit sticky here. My understanding is grand juries are secretive, that the information is close held. The fact that we know what we know now, does it affect the defense? If they know, for example, that Alvin Bragg had to push this rock uphill for a ways to get this indictment, what does that signal to the defense?
Exactly right. While we may not know what went on exactly in the grand jury room, we have the benefit of, for example, Mark Pomerantz, a former volunteer member of the DA's office of New York, who wrote essentially a tell-all book that gave us a pretty good idea of what the push and pull was behind closed doors, not in the grand jury room itself, but among prosecutors in the DA's office. So I think that you might find that that's the kind of book that not only made the case for indicting Trump, but at the same time, it also, by giving the other side of the coin, the other prosecutors and their arguments, gave the defense a blueprint for how to proceed. So this and other pressure may have hastened this indictment, although it's difficult to say that this was a hastily put together indictment because it took literally years. So this is not something that was rushed into, although many have questioned whether or not these are the strongest potential charges against Donald Trump, and if the stronger charges might not be those in Georgia, potentially, or from the federal investigation led by special counsel.
Danny Ceballos, I'll ask you to stand by as we continue our coverage. Also joining us, NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hallie, let me get your thoughts and observations.
Well, a couple of things here. When you look at the political ramifications, Garrett laid it out well, that this is a former president, now a current candidate who is not planning, has no intention of backing away from this 2024 race. Remember, it had long been speculated for the last several weeks at least that this indictment could in fact come down. And let me lay out how I think we will see the Trump team, not politically, but legally, try to defend the former president from this. Again, with the caveat that Laura and Danny have laid out that we do not know yet what is in the indictment specifically. But from public statements that members of the former president's legal team have made, they will probably try to argue that this was simply, as they've said before, a kind of nuisance settlement, this alleged hush money payment, basically, that this was made in the personal capacity of Donald Trump and not, in fact, Michael Cohen, by the way, and not, in fact, as part of a campaign expenditure. They're going to do something else. They're going to try to portray Michael Cohen, who is a key figure, a key witness who testified repeatedly to the grand jury in this case, as a liar and somebody who simply is not credible. We have seen that already from Donald Trump again and again on his platform, Truth Social. And they'll also probably point to some statements made by a former member of the previous Manhattan District Attorney's team to try to say that even some former members of this team did not think that there was enough in this case to actually prosecute. This is what we have heard from the legal representatives of former President Trump already as far as the political impact of this, right? The base of Donald Trump has been sticky, Lester. And by that, I mean they have stuck with him through a lot of this. Remember, these hush money payment allegations came out even prior to the 2016 election, and Donald Trump still ended up in the White House here. The question that I think we'll be looking for as it relates to the 2024 campaign is what do his current Republican opponents and potential Republican opponents do and say about this? I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is considered to be the leading front-running candidate against Donald Trump in the primary, even though he hasn't even officially announced he's running yet. There's a lot of speculation that DeSantis will. How might he thread the needle on this now historic and unprecedented indictment against a former president, Lester?
All right, Hallie, I'll ask you to hang in there for us. Let me go to NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, how do you separate the politics, or will it not be separated?
They're not separated. They're very intertwined, right? This has been something, Alvin Bragg, when he was running to be the Democratic nominee, to be the next Manhattan DA, this was part of the campaign dialogue there. So this has always been intertwined with politics. And in many ways, Donald Trump has been, some might call it gaslighting, others might call it preparing his base for this moment, arguably for years. They're always out to get me, realize that when they're coming after me, they're coming after you. And when you look at just all the various ways that this has been polled, when you talk to various Republican strategists about ways they've already polled this, like it doesn't indicted Donald Trump, is he weaker in the Republican primary? And it's not clear that he is. Now, the question I've always had on this is, if he accumulates indictments, right? This is the first shoe to fall. If he's accumulating indictments throughout the year, does that suddenly become the weight where Republican primary voters say, hey, we like you, Donald Trump, but you can't win? That hasn't happened, though. The only rationale I've heard a Republican try to make against Donald Trump without trying to attack him has been, hey, he's lost 3 times, 2018, 2020, 2022. Either he or his ideas have lost at the ballot box. He's the Republican most likely to lose to Biden. But the problem is his voters don't believe it. He's convinced his voters he didn't lose in 2020. So they can't even use that argument effectively, that he already lost once. So it'll be interesting to see how voters react to now that he actually is indicted. And when you see the mugshot and you see all those things. But I do think we ought to judge his durability here, not after this indictment, after if another one comes out of Georgia and D.C. I think that's when we'll find out truly how politically durable he is.
Yeah, I've got Laura right here with me. What's the progress of those other investigations, which are arguably more serious charges?
Well, it's interesting. So the one, obviously, in Georgia, the special grand jury produced a report. Trump's attorneys have obviously attacked that process at length, and they've tried to quash that report. The district attorney there had said at some point that it was imminent, but that was really weeks ago, and so the timetable on that is not at all clear. It certainly is not going to take place anywhere near as close as this one is. The charges, as you mentioned there, are very different, and it has to directly do with him trying to get the Secretary of State of Georgia to invent a number of votes, attacking the center of democracy.
All right, I want to go to WNBC's Jonathan Deans now, who broke his chief investigative reporter for our station here in New York. He's been covering this story from the start. Jonathan, tell us what you've learned and how this is going to play out. Our first hint, we should note that there was a stepped-up police presence downtown. What do you know?
Yeah, late this afternoon, the NYPD was advised to start stepping up security as the grand jury was expected to hold a vote this afternoon. We began reporting on that, and then we heard that the grand jury was voting, and then the result came in late this afternoon. Multiple sources telling us that the grand jury has voted to indict the former president of the United States. We are told that his defense attorneys have been advised, and we are awaiting word as to when, if as early as tomorrow he'll appear in court here in Manhattan, or will that be pushed into next week? That will be a conversation between the prosecutors and the defense team. Meanwhile, we await to see if and when that paperwork gets filed and then unsealed and made publicly available so we can learn details more about it. But certainly a historic day here in New York and for the nation, the former president charged here in New York in connection with that Stormy Daniels affair.
All right, Jonathan Deans, thank you for that. Also with us, we'll return to NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hallie, I understand you have heard from Michael Cohen, the former president's former fixer.
Yeah, one of our producers, Adam Reese, who's been among the tips of the spear on reporting the story for us, has a new statement here from Michael Cohen. You say the former attorney's former fixer, yes, and that is why he is involved in this discussion over this hush money payment at all, as we have laid out here. Cohen, now we are hearing for the first time since news of this indictment against the former president broke. He says that he takes solace in validating the adage that no one is above the law, not even a former president. He goes on to